When somebody's the president of the United States, the authority is total. And that's the way it's got to be.
When the president does it, it's not illegal?
I'm just saying a president under Article 2, it's very strong. Read it. It gives me all of these rights at a level that nobody has ever seen before.
Hi again, everyone. It is 5 o'clock here in New York. I'm Alicia Menendez in for Nicole Wallace. It has transformed right before our very eyes. The Republican Party, by way of its leader, has shifted away from democracy and the idea that every voice counts to one where only one voice matters, that of the former president. As you just heard, that one voice is saying over and over that he should be able to rule without consequence. He should be able to say and do anything he wants. And what we've seen over the past several years is his party has welcomed and cheered those impulses on. But yesterday's ruling from the federal appeals court in D.C. was a declaration against that way of governing, a reminder that there are still guardrails in our government safeguarding us from authoritarian ways. The three-judge panel ruled that a president is not immune from prosecution for things he did while in office, stating that those in power cannot just do whatever they feel like. It was a devastating takedown of the former president's case, one that attorney George Conway describes as, quote, an airtight ruling. After the ruling came down yesterday, he said, by writing such a strong opinion, the D.C. Circuit may have hastened the day that Donald Trump will finally face consequences for seeking to block the peaceful transition of presidential power. What will the Supreme Court do? The strength of today's opinion makes it far more likely that the court will do nothing. Any court, including the Supreme Court, would have a tough time writing a better opinion than the one the D.C. Circuit published today. The best course of action would be for the Supreme Court to deny a stay and to deny review altogether in a matter of days, and that could mean a trial in the United States versus Trump no later than early summer. That's what a unanimous, airtight opinion can do. Even former Trump White House lawyer Ty Cobb, he agreed with that sentiment.
This is an epic opinion. This is an opinion, if it's the last word on these issues, as it may be, depending on what the Supreme Court does, will be studied in law schools for the next 120 years, along with other key constitutional opinions, such as Marbury versus Madison. I think that it will give the Supreme Court some pause, both because it gets these issues right, and it doesn't, while it's compelling, historic, monumental, it doesn't sweep too broadly. They only decided the few issues that they needed to decide.
Now, Trump has until Monday to appeal the immunity ruling, which he has said he will do. And then we will see if the U.S. Supreme Court agrees with the likes of Conway and Cobb. And that is where we start this hour with Democratic Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren of California. She served on the January 6th Select Committee. Plus, former lead investigator for the January 6th Select Committee, Tim Heaphy. And with me at the table, former top State Department official during the Obama administration, Rick Stengel. Representative Lofgren, let's start with you. As a member of the 1-6 Select Committee, you already came to the conclusion that Donald Trump committed crimes. I wonder what went through your head as you read this opinion.
Well, it's carefully crafted and comes to the logical conclusion that the ex-president is not above the law, and when he broke the law, he can be held accountable criminally. We understood that. That's why we voted unanimously to refer Trump to the Department of Justice for prosecution for a variety of criminal acts. We found when we investigated that he was at the center of a broad-ranging conspiracy to overturn the election, essentially to overturn the Constitution. And it was gratifying that the court wrote such a careful decision, really confirming what we had already concluded in the January 6th committee.
Do you think this decision is so strong, so buttoned up, that as you had Conway, Cobb, others saying, it doesn't make sense for the Supreme Court to take it up? It makes more sense for them to say, we can't outdo this.
Well, I never like to speculate what the Roberts Court will do, but I do think they couldn't write a better opinion, and I'd be hard-pressed to try and figure out how they could come to a different conclusion, frankly. It's based on the precedents, the founding fathers' words, and common sense. So I guess the real question is whether they issue a stay and delay. I would hope that they would not. I think that would further undercut confidence in the court. We know that their prestige is at an all-time low now, and I'm sure that Justice Roberts wants to avoid doing anything that would further undercut confidence in the court.
We cannot talk about presidential immunity without talking about what is coming tomorrow. The court is going to hear oral arguments in the 14th Amendment case brought by Colorado. Representative Loughran, what do you expect to hear tomorrow?
Well, I don't know. Certainly, he committed insurrection. There's no question about that. I guess the real issue is who gets to decide and what are the standards for deciding. I suppose the court could weasel out of the conclusion in that way. But we know what he did. It's interesting. Some of my colleagues, Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Greene, just introduced a bill saying, well, he didn't do it. The 14th Amendment actually does provide for a role of Congress. Both houses can excuse the disability, the insurrectionist, by a vote of 2/3. But that's not even what their resolution does. It's sort of, don't believe your lying eyes. He didn't do what we saw him do.
Let's pull up the full screen of that resolution led by Matt Gaetz. They're trying to say that Trump did not engage in insurrection or rebellion against the United States. This is, of course, an attack on the 14th Amendment language, Tim. They are trying to undermine it as the same argument, one of the same arguments we've heard from Trump's own attorneys. Here's the thing, Tim. The 14th Amendment case, the immunity case, they are tied, not just legally, but the subject matter itself.
Mm-hmm. They are tied, but the Supreme Court does not typically, Alicia, review findings of fact. They're not set up to do that institutionally. Their role is to evaluate questions of law. So as Ms. Loughran said just a little while ago, they will evaluate whether or not Section 3 of the 14th Amendment can be invoked by a state official, or is it Congress? Did the Colorado process provide the former president with due process in making its findings? Is the president one of the officials who is subject to coverage? Those are legal questions. They, again, institutionally are not equipped to make findings of fact. So they're not going to, I don't think they're going to decide whenever they issue an opinion after tomorrow's argument whether or not the president did or didn't engage in insurrection. That is a factual question that the Colorado court answered in the affirmative. They're going to evaluate the process by which that finding was made and whether or not the 14th Amendment can be invoked by a state official. Whole cloth, brand new, haven't had this before with respect to an insurrectionist former president and a finding by a state as such. So it'll be fascinating to see how they answer those legal issues.
Well, speaking of situations we have not found ourselves in before, Rick Singal, you have a person who is vying for the presidency and yet telling us he does not want to abide by the Constitution of this country.
Yes, I was struck by the role that you had before, because he obviously, from the beginning, has confused the job of President of the United States with King.
Yes.
That's exactly what he thinks it is. I mean, the ruling by the federal court doesn't seem novel to me. If there's any principle enshrined in the Constitution, is that no person is above the law, even a former president. And by the way, as the court said in another case, the highest office in a democracy is citizen. So they called him Citizen Trump. So we're only looking at these things because you have someone who basically wants to be a dictator, wants to be a king. And the Supreme Court, if you're asking me what I think they'll do, I mean, I think they'll sort of weasel out of it because they do want, and the other thing the Constitution provides is that we do want to have elections make decisions. And the question of whether that the Article 3 is self-enforcing or not is one that they will probably weigh in on.
There's also, we're going through, Congressman, the 4 different buckets of questions that are going to be culled through tomorrow. And one of those questions is whose responsibility, accountability is here. And there's sort of, I don't know if you've ever seen that meme of all the Spider-Men pointing at each other. There's a little bit of that happening here where there's a finger pointing back at Congress. And I can only imagine as a member of the 1-6 committee that there's a little bit of you saying, we tried to hold him accountable, right? We tried, and members of his own party Party were unwilling to heed the call of duty, and instead they stood by their guy. Now there is no choice but for this to either be contended with in the courts or at the ballot box.
Well, the court itself referenced that members of the Senate relied on the fact that he could be prosecuted and was no longer president when they failed to convict. That was a big mistake on their part, and we've paid a price for it, but we can't unwind history. I do think that there is a strong chance that the court will decide on procedural grounds that the 14th Amendment is not self-executing. I think that's not an irrational position to reach. But there's no question that Trump tried to overturn the election and the Constitution. He was an insurrectionist. The real question is who gets to decide that question when it comes to ballot access. And, we'll find out what the court thinks.
Well,
relinquish what remains of the old spark.
So who's the insect? You? What? Who's the insect?
Protect you. They will defeat it on our world, and we will defeat them here.
This was just a diversion. Security teams bring up. Ravage, he's already inside. Deeds! Give me an update on that reserve. Boss readiness. What was his name? What was it?
Evac, sir.
Right, evac.
She's right in front.
We're facing a heavy, sustained attack. They appear to be after the All-Star.